Hello, folks. We're going to make a start. If people would like to come and take a seat, and we will commence our meeting tonight. There's plenty of seats down the front if you want to come close. So welcome everyone. It's great to see so many faces turn out tonight to talk about the town of Gawler's boundary reform proposal. My name is Nicole Halsey. I'm from a company called URPS and I will be your facilitator for tonight. I'd like to acknowledge that tonight we meet on the land of the Gawler people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So just a couple of housekeeping matters. It'd be great if people could just pop their phone on silent. Of course, if you need to take a call or something urgent comes up, feel free to duck out into the hallway. Toilets, there are some just off this immediate corridor where you entered to the left, or you can go out back into the community centre and round to your right. In an emergency, apparently we will hear a sound. There is a person who will come and help us, but will essentially exit out of this door onto the grassed area outside. We are scheduled to finish at 9 o'clock, depending on how things go, and if you've had all your questions answered, we may finish a few minutes early, but I will promise to have you out of here by 9 and home to your families. We are needing to observe, of course, COVID-19 conditions here tonight. Obviously, we've got you spaced out. Please maintain, a metre and a half from other people. We will have a roaming microphone. We ask that you don't handle it, and we've got David who's up the back who will assist you with that. Of course, we've got hand sanitizer, and if you need to cough or sneeze, please use your trusty elbow. We also have a number of handouts. I think most people have been able to gather them up as they came in, but there are a number over here to my left and at the back. But at some point, if you need a little bit more detailed information about the areas that we're looking at, please feel free to take one of those. So what's ahead of us tonight? We have a number of speakers. We've got 3. They're all up on our stage, elevated up here behind me. But essentially, we're going to spend a very short part of the evening hearing from our 3 speakers. And I am going to ask you, if it's okay, just to keep your questions to the end of those presentations, because then the rest of the night is we're in your hands. Well, I'll be facilitating a Q&A session. Our time tonight is around spending it with you and making sure you've had your questions answered and the clarification you've needed has been provided, which will enable you to either complete the survey that's online, if you haven't already done so, or prepare a written submission or make a verbal representation at Council's meeting coming up in November the 3rd. So our time tonight here is really about making sure you have the information you need. Think about this proposal that the town of Gawler has around boundary reform and where your views are about that. We also have a number of big posters up on the walls. There's some to my left and there's some to my right where you entered. Kirsty kindly gave you some post-it notes. Feel free to jot some things down throughout the meeting and add them to the posters as you leave. But we're essentially asking, what do you like and what don't you like about the proposal? Just because we're not necessarily going into mass discussion here tonight, it's more around Q&A. But if there's some things that you want us to know, please feel free to jot them down on those post-it notes that you've got, and you can add them to the posters as you leave. So we're going to hear from our speakers in a minute. And I'm going to ask you, as I said, to hold your questions. Totally my job is about making sure you get the information you need. And obviously, if we have to take anything on notice, we will make sure we get those answers back to you. We are live streaming, so you are on camera. David's down the back operating that, but that will be available. A recording of tonight's proceedings will be made available on Council's website. In terms of questions on notice, if you've registered via Eventbrite, we have your email addresses, so we'll be able to send those back to you, but also we'll make them available on Council's website. So just letting you know, there might be some things that we hear tonight and we have to have, we might need to take that away and find out that answer for you. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mayor Karen Redman. Did you want to come up to the podium or do you want to stand there? Totally up to you. Thanks, Mayor. I've just popped that screen up behind you, but but I'll let you talk to us a little bit more about Council's proposed changes. Yeah, let's turn it on.
Is that better? Oh, that's better. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along in this mild September evening. It's starting to get warmer. No more cold weather, hopefully, fingers crossed. And we had almost a storm last night, but it sort of came and went before we even blinked. So firstly, thank you, Nicole, for facilitating this session this evening. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on Kaurna land this evening. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So why are we here? Clearly, boundary reform. The core role of a council within its community is to think strategically and plan for the future. And one of the core visions of council is boundaries and boundary reform. The first strategic plan of council to highlight boundary reform happened in 1995 when we had our first strategic plan, and it's still there. It's still part of our priorities. So why now? Well, in January 2019, the state government changed legislation which enabled local councils to go through a process to seek changes to their boundaries in line with certain criteria. So this new legislation provided council with an important strategic opportunity to put forward a case on behalf of our community so we can continue to provide services and infrastructure to our residents, businesses and visitors and our growing community into the future. Council resolved in May 2019 to strategically investigate boundary reform. And since then, we've had a number of conversations around the council table. This is the first time that we've come out and had formal public consultation, and hence the reason we're here tonight. So we're very much at the beginning of this process, and it's quite a detailed process, and I'd like to formally welcome Alex Hart from the Office of Local Government here this evening, who is going to talk to us a little bit about what the Boundary Commission does. Thank you, Alex, for coming along. And Alex tells me she's a Two Wells girl. Is that right? A long time ago. So she knows Gawler very, very well. So I think we're very fortunate to have somebody of Alex's calibre here. So thank you for coming. I'd also, and please forgive me, I didn't recognise some of the VIPs in the room. We have some elected members from Light Council, Gawler Council, we have staff from Gawler Council, and of course all of you here tonight from our community. So the Gawler boundary reform proposal is based on strong community connections. Where people connect helps define that community, where they feel they belong, where they live, learn, play, shop, worship, socialise or volunteer, and the list goes on. It makes good sense to look into adjusting the boundaries as we grow and plan our future, that is Gawler. We need to keep up with the changes, and we need to keep up with how we see ourselves as a community. The areas included in this proposal are Concordia, Evanston Park, Gawler Belt, Hewitt, Calbeeba, Reed and Hillier. Areas suggested to be removed from Gawler to reduce properties being intersected by a council boundary and being split, one property being split over two council areas, are Yulbury and Bibaringa. The planned Roseworthy Township is not under consideration to become part of this Town of Gawler proposal because Council rightly recognised the financial impact this would have on Light Regional Council. At this important stage of this process, we want to know what you think, and that's the reason we're here tonight, and of course next Monday night as well. Have we got it right? What do you think is reasonable for a council of our size and growing, and the services that we provide, is it the right time to have an independent body, being the SA Local Government Boundary Commission, investigate the matter? So that's all I've got to say. I'll hand over to Nicole, and I think Alex will be next. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor Redman, for those opening words. So as I mentioned, I might just pause with the questions for now and invite Alex Hart up. Alex, I'll just pass you the clicker. If you use the right-hand one, that'll change. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Nicole. And thank you, Mayor Redman, for the invitation to join you tonight to talk about the Boundaries Commission. As Mayor Redman says, I am from the Office of Local Government. Amongst other things, we provide support to the Local Government Boundaries Commission as they undertake their role. I would like to clarify from the outset that my purpose here tonight is to talk about the process by which the Commission receives and considers proposals for council boundary change, that the Commission at this stage has no views on Gawler's proposal and won't be able to form that view until it's formally submitted. I will go through the process rather quickly because I'm conscious that there's plenty of time after I speak for you to ask me any questions that might arise in your discussion tonight. Oh, I'm a little bit taller than Mayor Redman.
You are definitely taller.
Is that better? Good to go? Okay, lovely. Now, the Commission is its own body in the legislation, but it's actually a role that's undertaken by the Local Government Grants Commission. The Grants Commission is an independent body. It's made up of 3 people, all of whom have considerable experience in local government. The current members are Bruce Green, who is a former mayor of Port Lincoln Council. He's appointed jointly by the Minister and the Local Government Association. Other members at the moment are Wendy Campana, who's a former CEO of the Local Government Association, and Mayor Dave Burgess, who, as many of you will know, is the current mayor of Mid-Murray Council, not too far from where we are tonight. They are an independent body. As Mayor Redman says, their role as the Boundaries Commission was only given to them on the 1st of January 2019 when the legislation changed to change the way in which boundary proposals are made and considered. Really, I should note at the outset that the objective of the changes that were made at that point was to enable proposals for boundary change to get on the table and be considered. Prior to that, it was very, very difficult for councils to have proposals considered by any body, be it the minister or an independent body. So that was quite a deliberate intent when the legislation changed. Because of that, it's also extremely important that when boundary proposals are made, that they are assessed by an independent body. You'll probably get sick of me saying this over the course of the night as I answer your questions, but they are independent. They make their own call about the proposals that they receive, whether they should be investigated or not, and then they make their own decision about the recommendations they provide to the Minister at the end of that process. The Minister has almost no role in that process until that point. As I said, I'll talk through the process in a little while, but it is worth just remembering that the Boundaries Commission is beholden to no one but themselves as they consider these matters. Now, this is a rather horrific flowchart, so my apologies. It probably can't read it from where you are, let alone understand it, but it's really just a prompt for me to walk you through what are the main points in regard to the Boundary Commission process. This diagram actually covers all of the proposals that could be made to the Commission, but I'll restrain myself to commenting on the proposal that's the subject of your discussion tonight, which is what we call a general proposal, so a more significant proposal that's being made by a council. At the moment, we're right up the top in that green box, which is labelled Prepare Proposal. As we've mentioned, the legislation for the first time and uniquely gives councils the ability to put a proposal to the Commission. The Commission considers this within not only the legislation that sets up its role and tells it what it needs to do in certain regards, but also in relation to the guidelines that it's published that provide instructions to councils or other bodies who are considering whether to make a proposal or not. According to those guidelines that the Commission has written, proposals come in 2 stages. And I'm sure I'm telling you something that you already know because there's been a fair bit of public attention given to this process. So at the moment, Gawler Council has gone through what we call stage 1. which is really alerting the Commission to a potential proposal. The intent of this is for the Commission to get an idea of what councils or other bodies might be thinking of and give the Commission an opportunity to provide advice back to that body before they go to the considerable effort that's needed to go to what we call stage 2, which is the decision to submit a proposal to the Commission. At that point, this has not happened. It hasn't happened at all. There are various proposals under development at the moment, but none have yet progressed to stage 2, which is to make that final decision to submit to the Commission. At that point, we're in the diamond box directly under the green one, the Commission will receive the proposal should Gawler Council or any other council decide to move to that point. At that point, the decision that the Commission will make is not whether or not to approve the proposal, it will be whether or not they will investigate it. That's a really important point, and I think that there sometimes is a bit of a misunderstanding that when the Commission receives a proposal and makes a call, they're saying yes or no to the proposal. In fact, they're saying yes or no to the investigation of the proposal. The Commission must then undertake its own investigation. Again, I'll mention the word independent. They have the ability to appoint investigators with particular expertise that is relevant to the proposals, which can include local knowledge. It can include a knowledge of local government finances so that that's well understood and through its investigation, or any other matter that the Commission thinks is relevant and is needed for them to fully understand the implications of the proposal for all affected councils and communities. So they'll undertake that inquiry, and for a significant proposal such as the one that Gawler is contemplating, that would be a fairly significant piece of work. Another very important part of that investigation would be the Commission's own community consultation and engagement. It's really important that they do their own work in that regard because they do need to undertake it from their independent point of view. They have no vested interest in any proposal that comes to them. They just want to know about what the effect will be, positive or otherwise, on the council that's making that proposal, submitted that proposal, other affected councils, and of course, most importantly, what the most desirable community outcome is with all of those things in mind. Once the Commission has finished its investigation or its inquiry as it's presented there, it will publish its report, and that report will have the recommendations to the Minister. The recommendations to the Minister will be based on the proposal that comes to the Commission, but the Commission is not restrained to just saying yes or no to the proposal that's been put to them. The legislation gives the Commission the ability to vary the recommendations from the proposal that they have investigated. So it gets them a little bit of a room to say yes to some things, no to others, or in the course of their own investigation, if an alternative appears to them to be a better course of action, they have the liberty to make that recommendation to the Minister. And it is, as I said, published, so it's very transparent as to what those recommendations are before the Minister gets them. Once they've published their report, it goes to the Minister. The Minister can request changes. The Minister can't tell the Commission what to do, but can certainly write to the Commission and say, "Dear Commission, I'd really appreciate it if you consider this." And the Commission can then choose whether or not they do that. If that does happen, again, that's published, so it's very transparent. And then finally, the report is finalised. The Minister then makes a decision about what recommendations that she, at the moment, will give to the Governor. And the Governor would then make a proclamation if there is a change that's been decided upon. That proclamation can do a number of things. It's a bit of a technical term, but basically it's a notice that's published in the Government Gazette that gives effect to government decisions. And that proclamation can do more than say, this area is now in this council. It can do things around how rates will be set in that area for a period of time. It can set a time in which the transfer will happen and also deal with a range of other matters, particularly in relation to the transfer of council assets that might be needed if an area changes from one council to the other. So that's a really important part of the process as well. Once the proclamation is published, that's the end of the matter, and things roll out as per the proclamation, and if there has been a boundary change agreed on, that's what gives it life. I might leave it there. That's a very quick whistle-stop tour through the Commission's processes, and leave it to the questions that I'm sure will arise over the course of the evening.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. I'd now like to welcome the Town of Gawler's Chief Executive, Henry Innett, to the podium, and Henry's going to talk us through the actual boundary reform proposal. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks for that. Thank you, Alex. Ladies and gentlemen. So as you can just seen through the flowchart and what Alex has just said, the boundary reform process is a very prescribed one. It's not one that council's invented, but one that we're certainly obligated to abide by and follow each step. So just going back to the proposition, it's very much focused on growth management. It's focused on communities of interest. It's focused on effectively one community, which is the Gawler community. We are one of the fastest growing council areas in the state. Over the next 20 years or so, our population will nearly triple. And with that comes a whole raft of responsibilities and obligations in terms of sustainable growth, efficient governance, and then the appropriate allocation of resources. And as we plan for the growth of Gawler, logic prescribes that we need to consider the communities who are on the other side of the road, those communities who are part of the sporting clubs, who are part of our social fabric. And it would be irresponsible for Gawler to not consider. So when you start to consider the communities in Gawler and adjoining Gawler and the future communities, what does that mean and what is responsible governance? And our proposition is that that responsible governance is about one community collectively understanding its needs, both now and over the coming decades. And the fact that we have Gawler East, which is just starting, we have Concordia on the doorstep, which has the potential to create a population of 20,000 people, and we have another sort of a number of other precincts of Gawler that form our community. Then again, it's an obligation that the council has put its hand up and said, it's now time to have the conversation. And over the last near on 7 years or so, or even more, when council has been turning its mind to its growth and how it manages its growth, it has considered the adjoining communities. More recently, our particular focus has been on rec and sport. We're looking at Carbeethan, we're looking at this precinct here. And again, we're not looking at just the Gawler population, we're looking at the Gawler region's population in terms of its demographics, in terms of the growth changes, in terms of what the community needs. And so it's that focus that we'll continue to have, and also in that regard, as part of the council's most recent strategic planning review, the most significant of its strategic planning reviews, the community plan, which is going to council tomorrow night to be released for public consultation. It's very much looking at that broader strategic context. So it's about making sensible decisions, being more efficient in the delivery of services, such as managing our parks and open space, roads, waste collection, the delivery of sustainable business practice, while ensuring we are supporting our whole community, that is the greater Gawler community. So I look forward to the conversation this evening, see how we go with the questions and answers, and take it from there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Henry. Wonderful. So, folks, the rest of the night really is over to you now. We've got our 3 panellists up here and a number of staff in the room if we need to draw on extra resources. But we've got Alex, got Mayor Redman and Henry here to answer any of your questions or clarifications about this proposal to reform the boundary of the town of Gawler. So I've got David up the back. David's got a microphone on a long arm, which means that no one has to touch it. So he'll come to you. If you want to raise your hand, I'll direct David to you. And it would be nice if you're happy to introduce yourself, and if you're okay to tell us which council area you're from, that would be nice to know as well, but it's up to you. Who would like to kick us off? Does anyone have the first question of the night? No, down the front here. Thanks, Dave. Phew, I was thinking he's not going to work him hard enough. Test the system, I love it. Thanks, David.
Graham Brookman from the Food Forest in Hillier, which is just inside Gawler, only the river separating us from Light. My query really was for Alex in terms of there didn't seem to be much of a formal process for the affected councils to be negotiating within that kind of business. It looked like Gawler said, we want this, and the commission says you can have that. I would have thought there was, you know, a really formal process for all of the surrounding councils to be involved.
Is that working? Yes. Yes. Thank you for your question, and it is a very good question. The answer is that there certainly is. There are not only the Commission's own desire to properly investigate any proposal that comes to it, should it make the call that that proposal should be investigated, but they also have specific statutory requirements around engagement. Where that will really kick off is if the proposal is accepted for investigation. This is the point I made a little earlier, which is that Gawler's next step, should it choose to take it, is to submit a proposal to the Commission. The Commission at that point will decide whether or not to investigate the proposal. So if they say yes at that point, they are not saying, yes, Gawler, we agree to your boundary changes. They're saying, yes, we will investigate those boundary changes. And they have very specific requirements, both in the Act and in their own guidelines, to understand the impact of that change, not only for Gawler, but on all affected councils. There are a number of affected councils or potentially affected councils with this proposal. I think it's fair to say the one that gets the most attention would be Light Regional Council. And the Commission must understand what impact that would have on that council as well as Gawler. And that's a really critical part of the decision-making process that then we'll have at the end of that investigation to make the recommendations to the Minister. Yes, the Commission, if the proposal gets up, will be having detailed discussions with the councils. At the risk of sounding threatening, I should also note that the Commission actually has very significant powers to require information from councils to make sure it's making a properly informed decision. In the office, we tend to jokingly call them their Royal Commission powers, but they do actually have powers to compel any of the affected councils to give them the information that they need so that they truly understand the impact of what a change in an area could have on any of the councils affected by it. So I understand why you feel that at this stage in the process, the Commission may only be hearing from the council that is considering making the proposal, but that certainly does not mean that the other councils affected by the proposal will not have an opportunity to make their case very clearly to the Commission and give them the information that they need to make that call.
Thanks, Alex. That's great. Thanks, Graham, for kicking us off. Now, is there a question over here? No? Anyone else? Sir, thank you. If you'd like to introduce yourself, that'd be lovely. Thanks, David.
Is there a difference proposal for rural living council rates and normal council rates within the Gawler Corporation? The rates in the dollar?
No, they're the same.
Well, then my council rates will go up by 50%, from $2,000 to $3,000. I don't think I would very much appreciate going to Gawler paying $1,000 more for no more services than what I get now.
So you're obviously served from outside of town of Gawler. Is that you're from a different council area? Is that correct? You're from Barossa. Oh, you're from the
Barossa.
From the Barossa. Okay. So your question speaks to: would there be a change in the rate, your rates that you pay, if your area was taken into the town of Gawler? And I think, Henry, it's early days. We don't know that at this stage.
That's right. Yes, there is a difference between rates from one council to another, but the overall proposition, should boundary reform progress, is to balance that out over time such that it's an equitable distribution of who pays for what service.
I couldn't see that, but I don't think I quite agree with that it balance over time, because the length where we are currently is 1 hectare, and which is quite expensive in comparison with other areas. So will we be forced then, maybe we have to sell that as self-funded retirees that we can't afford to live in Gawler?
So probably we might
On
take
a big
that.
block.
What was your name? Sorry, Sarah, I missed it at the start.
And
What was your name?
Nick.
Nick. Hi, Nick. Probably that's, so your key comment is around how a change in rates might affect you if you change from being in the Barossa Council to the town of Gawler, but also that may have some financial impacts in the future. My understanding is at this point we don't know the extent of the rate change, if any, and Henry's talked about it being equalised over time, but I'd suggest that you write, I think you've given some post-it notes when you came in, to pop that comment around. That's perhaps something you're not sure about the proposal, and pop it up on the poster before you leave tonight. Are there other questions in the room? Shall we go here, the lady in red, and then over to you. Thanks, David.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Roach and I live in Light Council. Just in the report that I've gone through, I was a bit worried that there's a bit of lack of information about council service centres and offices. Like it highlights I live in Hewitt and it says how the council office is 2 kilometres for us and the Kapunda office is 30 kilometres, but it fails to mention that there is a service centre at Freeling, which is 13 kilometres away, which is only, according to my Apple Maps, a 13-minute drive. I'm sure it almost takes me 10 minutes to drive to Gawler office and get a park. So I feel that that's a little slightly misleading because it doesn't cover all the services that Light provide within their closeness. And also I'd like to be interested in how often, you know, most of my council business is done online, and what percentage of people maybe use online, so the situation, the location of a council office is almost irrelevant. And would, you know, does that count for Gawler council office as well? Do the majority of people pay their rates online or through the post office, or do they go into the office?
Well, 2 parts of that. Yes, we appreciate that there are parts of the Light Regional Council services that are provided closer to Gawler, but their principal office is at Kapunda, which is 30 kilometres away. Acknowledge that the community overall is transitioning to an online service delivery, and the town of Gawler is facilitating that, but we have a lot of residents that enjoy that face-to-face interaction, and which we continue to provide and we will do in the future. So I'm not disagreeing with you in part, but you are closer to effectively the Gawler community than I would suggest than the broader Light regional community.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Over here, David, if that's all right.
My name's Margaret and I live in Cowbeaver, across the road from the Springwood estate. My issue is that going by the Bunya, the Gawler Council appears very unstable from what I read. In the Barossa Council, I've always received and have been for 20 years, excellent communication, excellent service. And until last week, I had a 45-acre investment property in the Light Council and received excellent service from them as well. Can you assure me that the Gawler Council is going to be a more stable council when you take over, or if you take over?
Well, my experience is that Gawler Council is very stable. I think that, and my experience as a resident, if that means anything, is that I've received excellent service. That was well before I got on council. I guess it depends on what type of services you're receiving now. I do think that when you look at efficiencies and effectiveness of councils, and we are encouraged by state government to become more efficient, that's seen as a good thing. And I think all councils in our region and everywhere are striving to do that. So Gawler Council is no different. We're not unstable. We've got excellent staff, many of whom are here this evening and who work very hard, some of whom live in Gawler, some who don't, some who live in Light Council, and even in Barossa or Adelaide. But it's about their work, and I see excellent service from our council workers, so I'd like to think that you'd get just as good service from Gawler Council.
So are you saying that what the Bunyip's writing up is incorrect?
Well, I don't think most people believe what they read in the papers, with all due respect to Sarah, who's here tonight from the Bunyip. She does a great job. But my experience is that, no, we're not unstable.
Thanks, Margaret. Other questions? Andrew.
So Andrew Philpott, so I live in the Light Regional Council. I work for the Light Regional Council, but I'm not here in any capacity from the Light Regional Council. And I thanks the opportunity to discuss this reckless land grab from Gawler Council tonight. So sorry, Karen, I couldn't help myself, got to stir the pot a wee bit. So a question to Alex is, and I think you've probably already answered this question, Light Regional Council is a mixed beast. So we have about 1,000 square kilometres of land. A lot of that is broadacre farming, so a fairly low rate revenue generation. 5 principal towns plus Hewitt and our rural living areas. So it's that mix of income streams and I guess wealth and asset wealth that allows us to have a service delivery across the whole council. So my concern is if you start removing some of these areas like Hewitt, Gawler Belt, etc., the whole income stream for this council will change. So this will obviously be part of your investigation. You'd look at how that would affect our ability to deliver services into the future. Thank you.
A question when the questioner answers it in the question, but yes, that is correct. That's better. That is true. I think it's worth remembering, I certainly don't want to speak for Mayor Redman or Henry, but the point at the process, I love talking about processes, I am a bureaucrat. The point at the process we're at now is essentially Gawler making its own call as to whether it submits a proposal to the Commission or not. So I said at the outset that the Commission has no views on that and won't be able to grapple with that until such time as they do receive a proposal, should Gawler Council choose to do that. Once they get it, then absolutely, they have a range of obligations to understand the effect of the change on all affected councils. The Commission is not in the business of agreeing to boundary changes that essentially make another council non-sustainable or without a sufficient resource base to provide a reasonably equitable range of services to its community. So that is a really important matter that they would have to take into account. I think for a significant proposal like this or any other significant proposal that comes to the Commission as part of their investigation, we would expect that they would have a specific financial investigation to look at what that impact would be. Also, councils, as you know, are very asset intensive organisations, so any boundary change is likely to have an impact on the assets and liabilities that might transfer from one council to another, and that's a really important thing for the Commission to understand. And should they choose a boundary, should they decide a boundary change is desirable, how that change could be managed as well.
So just to fill on that, so that you would say there would be potentially a fee payable. So if a council lost a rate generating area, whatever council that might be, then the council taking that over would have to pay a compensation potentially.
Waiting for the green light. The Act doesn't say anything so specific as pay compensation. I think ultimately, with assets and liabilities, the transfer might be a little bit more straightforward. With the impact of rate income, my expectation at this point would be that that is going to be more of a matter that the Commission would have to consider in the longer term as to whether the boundary change may be desirable or not. I don't think it's, we're not proposing something like, was it the Louisiana purchase where you pay X $1 million and you get a chunk of land? It's really a matter of considering all the factors that should be thought about when you're thinking about a boundary change from one place to another. You would never consider rates in isolation. it is always going to be, and I say this in regard to any proposal, not this one in particular, but always going to be a matter of the Commission making a call as to what rates are generated from a council area and the services and infrastructure that are used by the community that's paying those rates. I can't give you a clear answer to that and say, yes, it's going to be X dollars and the transfer will happen. I don't think it's quite that simple, unfortunately, or fortunately. It really is just a matter of the Commission truly understanding the impact of a boundary change for the council that is proposing it, and also the other councils that would be affected by it, and ultimately for the communities that would be affected by the change. And by affected communities, I should clarify that, of course, we mean the community that is in the area that's proposed to be moved. It also means the community within the council that would lose that area, and it also means the community in the council that would receive that area. They are all communities for the purpose of the Commission whose views on the change must be sought and understood.
Thanks, Alex. Over here. Thanks, David.
Yes, my name's Tony Clark. I'm a resident of Gawler East and enjoy being a resident of Gawler East. Like Regional Council, we're very forward-thinking in their planning many years ago. They're very entrepreneurial. They started looking at Roseworthy many years ago as being a mini city, and the planning went forward very well. They've been looking at private joint ventures with council through Bunyip Water, and they were looking forward to having a large rate increase and a population increase through Roseworthy, through no fault of their own, through the change in the state government's 30-year plan, which effectively put the boot on 7 years worth of planning and investment by Light Council. Their expansion of rates evaporated overnight. Gawler Council is still trying to progress the town, and we obviously need to have more and more services. We've only got a certain slice of the pie. The slices are getting thinner as we have to provide more rates and more services for those rates. What would be the alternative, Henry, for Gawler not to proceed with this moving into the future?
Just going back to your commentary about Light Regional Council's visionary work and planning and so forth. The town of Gawler opposed the earlier vision of Light Regional Council in terms of the mega city of Roseworthy, the 100,000 population. The town of Gawler presented the proposition that wasn't appropriate, wasn't sustainable, wasn't good planning. The town of Gawler currently has near on 15 years of vacant land that's zoned for urban development. And in terms of orderly development of land, it's not appropriate to hop skip from one area to the other. And I think what the state government at the time did in terms of reducing the scope of the Roseworthy expansion is fair and reasonable. Again, given the fact that the town of Gawler has 10 to 15 years of supply of land, and other parts of northern metropolitan Adelaide are significantly vacant. There will be a time, but I don't think that time's right. In terms of having and the relationship between councils, we could effectively have 3 councils influencing the management and the growth and the governance of the greater Gawler community, i.e. the communities of interest that form this community. And that might be okay in an established urban area of Western Adelaide or Eastern Adelaide, but not in an urban fringe as we are here at Gawler. I think it's a far more reasonable proposition that you have one council that oversees that growth, and that should be the town of Gawler.
Thanks, Henry. Any other questions? I'll go here and then back to you if that's okay, Anne-Marie. Over here. Thanks, David.
Good evening. My name is Simon Seller. I'm an elected member for the Light Regional Council. Mayor Redman at the beginning said this session is a part of the reason for this session is to find out if this is a reasonable thing to do and to this boundary change. I was wondering if to make this decision, if this is a reasonable decision, wouldn't it be very important to know the exact costs that are involved in doing so? So this is my question. in the hypothetical case that this application goes through the different stages and it ends up being coming to the proclamation stage, is it known how much it would cost for the transfer of all the assets, and like how many, is it in the hundreds of thousands, is it in the millions? What would be the actual cost to the town of Gawler to go through all the way at the end with this? Because I think leading through all these different stages, which are significant costs attached to that as well, to then not know what the end cost is going to be, I think is not reasonable in my opinion. So I just wondered if you guys could enlighten us on that.
I'll start, given you mentioned me at the beginning, Simon. I think Alex did explain just the complexities around understanding the impacts and what transfer of ownership would look like. And I think you said, Alex, that until you actually go through that process, you're not going to know what that will look like. And it's not in the Act as to whether you actually pay people compensation. So it's actually quite a nuanced process that the Commission will go through. That's correct, isn't it? So we can't quantify that. So Simon, I'm trying to be as clear as I can, because is this the biggest proposal that the Commission will see based on what's already been submitted, i.e. through expressions of interest?
At this stage, yes. In terms of council-generated general proposals, we have not had one formally submitted to the Commission at this point because it's such early days. We have this one, obviously, and also a proposal from the City of Campbelltown, which you may have seen in the media as well, about an area that's at the bottom of the Adelaide Hills zone. But like Gawler, that council, Campbelltown City Council, is currently making its own call as to whether it proceeds with submitting a proposal for the Commission's consideration. It is a complex matter. Having said that, I would expect, and I don't want to drop Henry into it at all, but I would expect that any council, when they're making that decision as to whether they proceed with a proposal or not, you'd have a pretty fair idea about what's in the area that you're contemplating being moved into your council. So, for example, you'd have a fair understanding of any significant community assets that might be in that area and what that might mean for your council should it proceed. But I also think there's difficulties in a council making a proposal, fully understanding that, because they have access to a certain amount of information, but not all of it. So that's where the Commission can use its own powers, as I said earlier, to get all of the information it needs, because the councils are, if compelled to provide them with that information. I've got a funny feeling that councils would not be reluctant to do it, but should they be, the Commission can compel that information so that that can be fully understood. But look, it is a matter that needs to be fully explored with any proposal. Because as I said, the Commission will be doing that very important job of balancing the interests that are being put forward by varying councils in relation to the area that's proposed to be moved. That a relinquishing council, as it's known, will generally argue that the area that's proposed to be moved, I think it's fair to say, historically are not in favour of these moves because of the perceived impact on their operation and services going forward. So they'll make that case, and they'll be given every opportunity to make that case. And a council, the area that is proposed to be moved in, will make the case that that area is within their community to all intents and purposes, uses their services, etc., and will be also given that opportunity to make that case as well. And of course, the other groups that will be given equal opportunity are, of course, the communities that will be affected by it.
So Council hasn't made a decision yet to put in a proposal, but that will come up, I think, later in the year. Is that right? And at that point, we will be asked, I guess, one way or the other. We'll make a decision one way or the other, Simon. As far as the investigations of the proposal, Henry, what sort of monetary figure? I think the figure of 200,000 was thrown around in one of our reports. Is that we're not quite clear on that because it depends on the nature of the investigations from the Commission. That's right, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the process for the actual payment of the investigation, which is the responsibility of any council that chooses to take a proposal forward, the process that we have is, obviously we don't expect councils making a proposal to send a blank cheque in with their submission. That would be most unreasonable.
Won't be happening, I don't think. I'd like to think not.
So the process is that the Commission would receive the proposal. It would make its call as to whether it should investigate it. I should state, and I should probably have said this earlier, that when the Commission's making that call, it has sort of certain guidance for its consideration of whether a proposal should proceed. And you'll often hear us talk about what we call the Section 26 principles, which are principles outlined in Section 26 of the Local Government Act, which generally describe the things that the Commission has to have regard to when they're thinking about the right place that a council boundary should be in. They cover quite a wide range of matters, but they generally centre around the different aspects of what people think of as a community of interest. So they'll look at those principles, think about the proposal that's been made to them. Does it generally fit within the remit of those principles and what the Commission can and can't consider? If they decide that they will, the next thing that they'll do is make a decision as to what they need to undertake in that investigation. Then they will provide the council with, the initiating council, with an estimate of how much that will cost. And then the council will make a final decision as to whether they proceed or not, just so that there's an opportunity for the council to understand what that price could be before the investigation kicks off.
Thanks, Alex. Anne-Marie. Oh.
So in the report that I downloaded, talks about in Hewitt, there's several pockets of land that are yet to be developed. At the present in Hewitt, there's 2 developments happening. And then after that, the only land that I could think of that would be developed would be our parks or the edge of the North Para River. So what areas what are they referring to in the report?
Well, I don't think the report was suggesting that we were looking at Hewitt for the purpose of it being incorporated in Gawler for its subsequent development potential. The report was referencing the fact that is effectively substantially developed. There might be some pockets of land that are undeveloped, but that was just stating a fact. It's not the case that we're looking at Hewitt because there is future development potential. It's not the case. I don't know. I don't know what pockets you're referring to.
There's a sentence in there saying there are several pockets. So the things that concern to me, because last year there was a group of residents that had to save their park in Everston Gardens because the council wanted to maybe to sell the housing. It concerns me that if we merged, that the pockets of land would be the ones that are used by our children for recreation. And that's a concern.
We might take that on notice if that's okay to, oh, sorry, Mayor.
There's been no discussion around removing parks from Hewitt.
Yeah, a statement of pockets.
Yeah. I think
so
we'll
someone should know which ones they are.
If I can, there's been no discussion at council about removing parks, absolutely not. No, there hasn't been any discussion around that.
Anne-Marie, what I might do, because if there's others taking notes in the room, there's a reference in the report to pockets. We'll check that out and perhaps come back to you. But I think being clear that that's not something that they're looking to do is for the further development potential or parks. Now, this lady here. And Simon, did you have another question as well? I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Can I just ask when the last time the boundaries were changed for Gawler? And perhaps to go with that, whenever that was, were these 7 areas, which are all snugly up against council's boundary, did any of them exist at that time?
Probably people in this room that probably have that information more than us. That's not something, the last, I think, was Dawkins Avenue in Williston was seconded into Gawler, and we actually had to redo the road a few years later at great cost. But that's the last one that I recall, but that was way before my time. So we'll certainly take that on notice. You might have the answer, Helen. Is that a leading question?
It's a bit of a Dorothy Dixie. It was 1985 and none of these areas existed. They've all been developed, privately developed since that period. So in 1985, we did take in part of the then Manapara Council and the Barossa Council, and it gave Gawler Council the opportunity then and the security to do such things as provide the Gawler Public Library, which is when I came to Gawler. So it was a significant thing. It's 35 years ago, and these developments have all been, in my opinion, deliberately positioned around our border so that the residents there can take full use, and why would you not, of the excellent facilities that we have.
I think what that also reflects is the fact that Gawler's a regional centre and has been for many, many years, and nothing ever stays the same. So you're right. When Hewitt first was developed, I think one of our current councillors, Councillor Little, remembers council advocated to have Hewitt as part of Gawler Council, but the government of the day didn't think it was appropriate. So that opportunity was lost. So it is a matter of never thinking that everything stays the same. Things do change, communities change, and this proposal is very much around setting ourselves up for our future, but also reflecting one council area with one community, and that's I guess the bottom line of this proposal. Now, there's nuances, and as you rightly pointed out, Simon, there's many complexities that need to be worked through and decisions made at each point. We've got many more decisions to make before we get to the pointy end, if you like. But I think from what Alex was saying, there's going to be ample opportunity for all community members, both within Gawler and surrounding, to have their say appropriately and directly to the Commission, which I think is a really important point. And I think you made that very, very clear. But you're right, Helen, things do change. And, you know, the opportunity to have one council and how do we set our rates? We'd have to have a proper rates review, Henry. That would be more than appropriate. In fact, it would trigger a rates review. It would trigger what sort of services we're providing, and we'd certainly expect people to have their say around that. Remember that rates are not set before a budget. A budget is set and then the rates reflect the budget. So whatever you have in the budget is what influences your rates. So rates are a creature of the budget. And councils at this stage still have control over that. Give it 12 months, we might not, depending on local government reform, which will give the minister the final say, and others like the ESCOSA is looking at giving ESCOSA an overseeing role with council budgets. So there's many complexities going forward that are external to boundary reform. But yes, you're right, Helen, things do change. And what is the opportunity and have we got our service delivery right? In the, you know, if it becomes the new Gawler, should we change our service delivery? What do we need another library? All those questions are open for discussion, I guess.
Simon, did you have another question? Yep.
So before, my question wasn't really about the cost of the application. I think that's been pretty well documented, and I think most people are aware of that. But since this being a public consultation, for the public to make a good decision about this, what has never been documented from whatever I've read is how much the cost is going to be at the end. I'm aware it's very complex and we don't know the exact figures, but there has to be some sort of estimate. Is it in the hundreds of thousands? Is it in the millions that it's going to cost Gawler Council to take over these assets in the end? Because I think that's a crucial piece of information that the public needs to have to make a valid decision on these matters. And I haven't read or heard anything about that yet. And that was my question. Do you have any indication, any good guess what this might be, so that the public knows what they're in for, even if you go through all these different steps and it gets through, we end up at the proclamation, what are the end costs still on top of all of that? I think that's super important information for the public.
Thank you again for the question. The Commission's, since it's taken its role on, has had a lot of debate amongst the three of them about should it get to the point where it's investigating a proposal, how it understands the many aspects of what it needs to make good recommendations to the Minister on a proposed boundary change. One of the very vigorous debates I've been having internally recently is how best to undertake the community engagement through that investigation. At the moment, because all of the proposals that are in development, or both of them really, are in their very early stages, there's a lot of focus on this particular stage of the process, which is the initiating council making the decision as to whether they put the proposal forward or not. And how councils have consultation events like this to understand their community's views and other communities' views in order to make that call. One of the things that the Commission, I think, has become clear on its own collective mind is how you enable communities to provide them with their views once these things are known. So it's very difficult for an initiating council to go to any community and say that if we incorporate this particular area into our council, the effect of it is going to be X, because, you know, to be frank, it's not their area, so they don't have that information. You know, those areas are not within their asset and management plans. They would have a look, but they just don't have access to that information. So I think one thing the Commission's got very clear about is that it's really critical that the Commission understands what that is and puts that information out so that if people are providing comments on those matters, they know that they are commenting on something that is understood in a way that really the only Commission can, because they're the only body that has access to all of the information. And they're also the body that has no skin in the game other than its requirement to and its own desire to make good recommendations to the Minister. So it's really important that those things are fully understood by that third party that can access that information, make that call and put it out, so that when you see it, you know that it's well informed by all of that detail, and then you'd be in a better position to comment on it as part of that part of that engagement that the Commission will undertake if it gets to that point. Does that make sense? It's a complex area. It's it's not straightforward. I think there can be a bit of a perception that the whole process is a council makes a call that it wants a bit of land, right? So the commission says yes or no, and then we're all done. It's, I think, as both Mayor Redman and Henry have emphasised, that it is a complex process, and it needs to be. It needs to be for a significant process to make sure that the decision at the end of it is the best one that can be made.
Thanks, Alex. And I guess, if I may, your flowchart spoke a lot to me, because then I have some of the supporting guidelines around the process, and I'm a very process person too, because I'm a planner. But this first step is really about enabling the town of Gawler to reach a decision about whether to proceed further in the boundary reform process. And I understand that what you're asking is, surely we need more information to even provide a view on this, yet that's coming down the track, isn't it, as part of the Commission's investigations and further detailed engagement with other communities of interest. So hopefully that's answered that question, albeit maybe not to your satisfaction in terms of you want that answer. Possibly what I would suggest, though, is you've made the point, I think, quite clearly that you would like to know that information at this point in time. So in terms of dislike about the proposal, is just understanding those financial implications at this point you would welcome. Councillor, I think you were next, is that right? And then I'll come here.
Thank you. So I'm also a councillor in Light Regional Council, Sam Mitchell, and with my colleague Simon represent Hewitt and Gawler Belt, which the proposal is relevant to. My question is potentially a little bit of a supplementary, so if I can ask it to you, Alex. When the Commission is looking to make its investigation, what financial metrics does the Commission use to assess the viability? I note recently in the August meeting, I think Gawler Council had a financial liability ratio of 95.7%. What that means for those without skin in the game, close to Gawler's rate revenue and income, it's also in debt. Asset sustainability ratios, what is the metric that the Commission's use to assess a council's financial health to take on this level of risk?
I think it's fair to say that the Commission is not going in to this with a set of rules or criteria that are set regardless of the proposal that's put on the table in front of them. All of those matters they really must consider in the context of the proposal that's given to them. I don't think they've got a fixed view about walking into it and saying, well, we won't contemplate any boundary change that might have an effect within the next 3 years on a council's net financial liability ratio that it should not exceed 65%. For example, that would be, not right. I think the critical question for the Commission will be if there is a view that a potential move could make a council financially vulnerable in the shorter or the longer term is something that they will need to consider. And that would be, I would expect, they would look at that with some specific advice on that from their investigators around, that would be your typical combination of a council's operating position as well as its financial liability ratio. But that's very hypothetical. I think the reality is that they are very conscious that for a significant proposal, this is a critical matter. That for people, it might often seem to be a decision that's driven on location or geography or all of those things, which are important considerations, but they're not the only considerations. So if this proposal came in to the Commission and it did decide to investigate it, I would imagine that they would have an investigator with that particular area of expertise giving them advice on a range of financial matters to make that call in the end.
David, just here if you don't mind.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Tooley from Gawler Council. I think my question is probably going to go to Alex. Alex, I've lived in Gawler since 1980. I live on Cheek Avenue, and when I first came here, I was part of the Barossa Council. And then that big reform happened, I'm going to say late 80s, maybe early 90s, where Gawler East expanded out to Sunnydale and we became part of the Barossa. But my observation was that boundary reform, around that time we saw the development of Playford, which took over Elizabeth and Munapara. My observation was that those boundary reforms were driven by a government agenda to reduce the number of councils, and that drove the alignment. So I've got two questions. Are there any examples of where a council, as Gawler's proposing, has simply decided to expand and take over some of its neighbours, where that's an individual council's decision rather than government reform? And secondly, wherever you draw the boundary, is there anything to stop the other council on the other side again developing? So it's alleged that Hewitt took advantage and built that complex there. It's alleged that this puts unfair pressure. This has been said by elected members and by the staff. It puts unfair pressure on council assets. It says that it drives up the rates of Gawler. I've never seen any empirical data or research, but I've heard elected members and admins say this is a justification for getting Hewitt because they're almost like leeches on the boundary that just suck the life out of Gawler and put upward pressure on our rates. I want to know whether that's an assumption or whether there's economic data on that. And that might be the third question. But my first two questions are there any examples where councils have simply decided to expand and achieve that? And what's to stop, wherever you draw the line, what is to stop the other councils developing again on those boundaries?
Alex, are you happy to start off? I can remind you of the questions if needed.
I took notes.
Well done.
Always handy for a multi-part question. I'll take what I think the first question is first. Previous examples. time's getting on, so I'll resist the temptation to give you a lengthy diatribe about the history of boundary change in South Australia. But it is worth noting that, as you'll all probably recall, there were significant boundary changes and council amalgamations in South Australia in the late 90s. And you're absolutely right. That was an agenda of the government at the time to have fewer councils in South Australia. Following that change, when we got down to our current 68 off 140 odd, there was very little change. That's because you will also be aware that the new councils came on board at the same time that the Local Government Act also commenced, the current Local Government Act 1999. The mechanism within the Local Government Act for considering boundary changes was quite restricted. It was the Boundary Adjustment Facilitation Panel, snappily titled. The intent of that panel was actually to consider tweaking boundaries where the amalgamation process hadn't quite landed them in the right place, rather than doing anything more significant. In fact, I believe at the time the bill went through that there was a plan to have a local government commission that would consider to look at the bigger ticket items, but it didn't quite make it through in 99 when the Act went through Parliament. So that left us with the Boundary Adjustment Facilitation Panel. It bit the dust in the previous government's review of boards and committees in about 2015, but it did very little. And the reason it did very little was that it was impossible almost to get a proposal to the panel for their consideration. Proposals could be initiated two ways: by eligible electors, as is still the case for boundary adjustments, and by all councils involved in a potential proposal. They all had to agree to get the proposal on the table. And that resulted in that best part of 20 years in exactly one that happened very soon after the amalgamations between Burnside Council and Adelaide Hills Council for Skye. So when the Boundary Adjustment Facilitation Panel died, the then Minister made a commitment that he would review that part of the Act. And the decision was made then not to allow councils to decide to expand per se, but to look at ways in which we could set up an independent body, and how would we get proposals on the table for them to think about, given that so little had happened. So the ability to initiate proposals expanded quite significantly. It now includes the Minister can do it. That has not yet happened, or it also enabled a single council to put a proposal on the table. But I emphasise once again that the council can initiate a proposal. If the Commission agrees to investigate it, it is not saying yes to the proposal. At the end of that process, the Commission will make recommendations to the Minister, and they are under no obligation to deliver what the council has asked for. They can say no, they can change it. They can do what they think is in the best interest of the councils and the community. I know I sound like a bit of a broken record on that, but that is the case. So the process we're in at the moment is this council is making up its mind whether it makes that proposal. If the Commission says yes, it is saying yes to the investigation, not yes to the proposal. And that's a really important point to remember. Now, in terms of your second question, which is regarding decisions that councils will continue to make almost regardless of where their boundaries are, to be honest, that they are planning decisions. Obviously, if you're looking at a particular proposal, you need to understand the context and the likely, what that exists. But the boundary change in itself doesn't necessarily change the planning policy. I don't think. I'm not a planner, unlike Nicole, but I don't think that one necessarily follows the other. So simply moving a boundary wouldn't guarantee that a council would then be able to undertake development on the boundary of where that new, on the edge of where that new boundary is. That would be a separate matter for consideration.
Thanks, Alex.
I think what you just said then is that there are no examples of where a council has expanded and taken over part of its neighbours outside of a government-led reform. I think that's your answer to the first question. And I think the answer to the second question is, like Council, Barossa Council can build another satellite suburb just across the road of wherever Gawler puts its boundary.
I think my answer to the first one is that has never happened and it will never happen under the current legislation, because that is not what the legislation enables. It enables a council to get a proposal on the table for the Commission to consider. It does not enable a council to make a decision about what that boundary will ultimately be. In regard to the second one,
it'd be totally subject
crystal ball,
to the
my crystal ball
zoning
is failing
and
me.
the process associated with that. And being, if it was directly on the boundary, my understanding is this council would be consulted in that process as well. But I don't know if any others in the room want to add to that. But yes, I agree. It's a bit crystal ball gazing. Other questions in the room? I'll go here and then I'll come back to you, Margaret, if that's all right.
I just wanted to prosecute Simon's question because I think it's the most pertinent for both Light and Gawler ratepayers, which I'm a ratepayer in both. The council will be asked to decide whether to spend the 200,000, 250,000 for the investigation by the Commission, to not know what their expense may be ultimately after that's possibly successful. It could be $1 million or $10 million. Is that correct? And if so, if they have made the decision and the Commission finds in Gawler's favour, are they duty bound to then go ahead with it, even if it's money that they can't afford to spend? And there would need to be borrowings to buy those assets, or the transfer of assets you mentioned. There would be borrowings in that, and then that would affect that council's ability to, bring their rates down by the fact that they've made these savings by having more ratepayers, offset by cost of borrowings. Is that correct?
I'm really not in a position to be able to comment on the specifics of the, so I just emphasise again that my comments are merely about process and hypothetical. It's not going to be as simple as swapping an area of a council for a cheque. It is more a matter of understanding what the impact is to make the call in the first place, and then, if necessary, putting a process in place by which that impact is managed, potentially over time. So, for example, I referred earlier to the last time really a significant piece of one council moved to the other, which was Skye, in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide, moved from Adelaide Hills Council to Burnside. That transfer actually took 5 years, and that was put in place so that there would be not a cross the line from 1 year to the next. Now you're Adelaide Hills, now you're Burnside, deal with it, but put in place so that all of those matters in regards to both revenue and expenditure pressures on both councils could be managed over that time. So I certainly don't want to give the impression that at the end of this process there's a single cost for a council that may be receiving an additional area. It's more an issue of how that process may be managed so that that impact is can be best managed by both councils involved, so to avoid that sort of sudden impact.
In that instance, did Skye know, did those councils, the council initiating, know what sort of expense they would be up for ultimately over that 5-year period?
I'm happy to say it was before my time, so I wouldn't be able to answer that for you.
Henry, did you want to add? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. If I could just add to the conversation about residential land, it being a sort of a profit motive proposition here. Well, whenever you develop a residential area, you have assets, roads, footpaths, other facilities, open space. They have a lifespan, and invariably it's about the maintenance of those facilities. For any parcel of residential land, the rates generally pay for the establishment and or the maintenance through to end of life. It's not a profit-making venture for any council when it's involved in looking at residential land. If we were looking at an area completely for commercial development that was established, a shopping centre or otherwise, then that is when the ledger changes and there's a little bit of revenue, positive revenue for a council. Invariably, residential is a cost centre, not a positive centre.
Like the Hewitt Centre, for instance, the Hewitt Centre is an asset that's not depreciated to zero, so there's a cost for that. Presumably, a transfer of assets would be a community hall. Would that be correct? And there'd be an expense to the initiating council for that.
I use assets in its broader sense for anything that could move from one council to the other.
Thanks, Alex. Margaret.
On the map you can see, I'd like to know from the Gawler Council their methodology of picking those particular areas and deleting the other two, which is Bibaringa and Ulibarri. Why have you not taken in any area on the end of Dalkeith Road, for example?
Okay, so it was around communities of interest, and if you look at Concordia, if you look at Hewitt, if you look at Ulibarri and Bibaringa, those particular parcels of land, one property goes through two councils, so it makes sense to give that property back to Playford in this instance, because it's one property and one landowner is subjected to two councils. So it makes sense to bring it in under one council. So that proposition went up to council, and council felt that it was reasonable to give that back to Playford, and one council would manage that one property. Does that make sense? So those particular two areas, with the area, so I guess council staff looked at all the areas that are highlighted on the map, which I'm assuming you've got in front of you. And so they looked at communities of interest, they look at the connection to the Gawler community and put it to council to be included as part of the proposal, and that was endorsed. So very much around that cultural connection, usage of services, one community. So it is about a cultural connection around the community of Gawler.
Thanks, Mayor Redman. Are there any other questions in the room? Over here. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. I brought this one up before. Gawler has around about 25,000 people. It says it markets itself to about 85. And it says that's why we're a regional centre. And it's why we can sustain some fairly large enterprises. If you just look at shopping, you know, 2 Coles, a Woolies, a Big W, Drake's Foodland. That says to me on a business model that's a good thing. Our businesses do well because we feed a bigger area. There's money coming into the town. I'd like an explanation, please, perhaps from the Mayor or CEO. This claim that's been made that our justification for taking over a place like Hewitt is that these people are effectively sponging off us. The other councils have been opportunistic. They've built these right on our boundaries. These people, and this is again, that's the argument that comes up in our council all the time, they are sapping the life out of our amenities, sapping the life out of our services, and they're putting upward pressure on our rates. This has been said, it's on the video record. Now, is that just pure assumption in order to justify the argument for grabbing them? Or have we got empirical data, have we done the research that shows these are the negative effects of the places like Hewitt sitting on our boundary?
Thank you, Ian. As I said before, I don't take the view that people who live on Gawler's boundaries are sucking the life out of Gawler. I don't believe that for a minute. They're part of our community. We're all in one community. And if you're in one council rather than 3, there's an efficiency of services in my humble view. One council rather than 3 providing services, one council and one garbage truck company instead of 2 that currently service perhaps Light and Hewitt with one company, and then Williston gets another company through Norma. Doesn't make any sense. So I know you have a different view and I respect that, But it's not about people sucking the life. It's about being part of one community, everybody having a say in that one community as well. So for me, it's very much around us all being part of one community, one council. And for me, it makes sense. It's as simple as that. But, you know, this is a long process. I think it's a very complicated process, which I think is unfortunate. And there's a lot of information that we haven't got, because until we start the investigation, if we do, or if the Commission does, there's further information that needs to be elicited. And then it's up to the Commission to decide. But it is about one community. It's not about other communities like Hewitt or Gawler Belt or Concordia sucking the life out of Gawler. They're part of our community. They contribute to our community, and we should all contribute in an equal way. It seems to make enormous sense.
And it's not me that's saying they say that. I'm echoing what I've heard in the chamber, and I can take it then you haven't got an answer to the question of have we got any data to back up these claims that these people from outside are putting upward pressure on our rates. I've heard elected members say that. And it's put, when they argue that we should be doing the boundary reform, this is part of what they say, and you haven't answered that question. Do we have any data to say that's true?
One of the, because we're a regional centre and because we cater for many people, our services deliver to many people, including people along our fringes that aren't part of the council, that pay council rates elsewhere. And, you know, people have different views on that. But again, I go back to one community. Why would you not want one community all contributing to our services? Now, you've got a different view. And like I said, I respect that. But it is about one community and everybody having a say. You want data. Part of the investigation, if we get that far, will be to elicit lots of different data. We certainly have library data. Our library data does reflect a regional status. Many people come into Gawler Library from both in surrounding areas and other areas, and also Gawler areas. So we do have that data if we wish to look at it. So it is available for certain areas. We have community and sporting clubs. Some executive members of our sporting clubs don't live in Gawler, but they are on the executive of various sporting clubs. Good luck to them, because they have a connection to that sporting club. We're not going to say that they can't do it because they don't live in Gawler. They contribute. Some of those executives live in our surrounding areas. They are connected to our community. I'll leave it at that, and maybe Henry wants to add anything.
Yeah, if I could just further to the sort of the observations about the level of analysis and information that we've presented to council as part of its decision-making process. It's comprehensive, that it's needed to be. I think Alex, your office has commented that it is a level of detail that has made their decision-making a little bit easier than what would otherwise have been the case. And it is that next phase of investigation that depending if council gets to that point, will then take it to the next level of independent, detailed analyses on a whole number of areas.
Thanks, Henry. A question here.
Diane Fraser, elected member for the town of Gawler. When Gawler Council makes decisions about assets or our Essex Park here, for example, it affects everybody, not just the town of Gawler. It affects the community living on our boundaries as well. And because they're not part of our community, they don't get to have a say. Where if they are part of Gawler, well, then they get a say in what happens rather than just having it put there. They might not like it, but they can't have a say. Where if they become part of Gawler, they actually have a voice.
Thanks, Councillor. I think that speaks to your point about communities of interest, Mayor. A question was here, I think.
Tony from Gawler East. I'm just reading from the Chief Executive Officer report of the Barossa Council in September of last year, where, to back up what Karen was saying here, one of their draft proposals says that the Springwood Development Area, which primarily resides in the town of Gawler, transfer out of the Barossa Council. But I believe Barossa Council have agreed not to proceed with their proposal for a boundary change. Given the excitable articles that appeared in the local media in the last 6 months over this between the three councils. What's the real consensus between the three councils? Here that Barossa is saying, look, we have no objection, they're next to Gawler, it's what Karen was saying about part of place and such, but they're not proceeding. Whereas we hear that Light Council, not volcanic, but pretty vitriolic about their response to it. Where do we actually stand between you and the other two councils?
Well, in terms of the Barossa situation, yeah, our colleagues in Barossa are very much open and supportive of the Springwood, their portion of the Springwood to be part of Gawler. And it goes to one of our principal arguments that managing growth should occur when the land is contiguous, which informs part of one community, where roads, open space, stormwater are all part of the one networks, that it should be overseen by one council, and our friends in Barossa have presented that's a fair and reasonable proposition. Our friends in Light, particularly in respect to Hewitt, that's not the case. However, although we agree with our friends with Barossa in terms of Springwood, for the same reasons we feel that Concordia equally should be part of Gawler and not part of the Barossa. It is a stone's throw from the centre of Gawler. The developers of Concordia are quite adamant that it will be an extension of Gawler, not an extension of Barossa. To suggest that a community that's on our doorstep has an association with the council that's 30 kilometres away, I would challenge that, and thus the communities of interest.
Thanks, Henry. Are there any other questions in the room? No? Great. Oh, one down the back.
Sorry, I just didn't want to miss my chance there. Elected member Nathan Shanks. I've just come here tonight to really get that community feel around this. This is it's a pretty big issue, one that's been going on for a while now, I guess. And I won't bore everyone with my opinion on it. That's what we have the chamber for, if you guys want to come in and have a chat there. What I will do is just try to simplify. What I've heard tonight is complex issue, process. All these items that unfortunately to the general ratepayer actually don't make sense. I've got to put my hand up and say, I'm an elected member 2 years in and this still doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm really about wanting to simplify that. So if we're talking about boundary reform and we're talking about taking over the neighbouring suburbs, firstly, I define community a bit differently than who pays rates in Gawler. So that's where we differ a little bit. But I guess what I want to make sure that is very clear is if we're taking over a ratepayer base that potentially could, let's say, double our measly little 11,500 ratepayer base that services 110,000 people, I think we're up to there, Ian, as well. And we are a regional hub as we keep on hanging our hat on. What is it if the residential rates is actually a break-even point, which is what we're hearing here? How is it that our ratepayers, by spending a couple of $100,000 now, will see those service levels increase for our current ratepayers and for the ratepayers that actually already utilise our services, as we are all in agreement with, because we are Gawler and we service 110,000 people, regional hub. How do we get to a point where we turn around to our ratepayers of 11,500 and say, you know what, guys, it's worth spending $250,000 now because in 5 years' time, your rates will go down. How do we make sure that that message is very obvious and it's not clouded by the complexity, and we can turn around to our community and say, look, we're making the right decision for you guys because your rate's going to go down and services are going to go up. Because let's be honest, that's all everyone in the room is worried about.
Thank you, Nathan. Council yet hasn't done the financial analysis to the level that you're suggesting would then get to that point. That's the investigation that will be undertaken. And an overarching, one of the overarching principles that are prescribed is that whatever happens with boundary reform, it needs to be sustainable for the councils involved. This was a question that came up in the chamber when we last considered this matter. It'll be the last thing that I'll be recommending to this council to progress with boundary reform if it's unsustainable. And as you say, and everybody in this room would be thinking, if this proposition doesn't result in efficiencies, effectiveness, greater sustainability, then the elected member body representing the community won't be going for it. But is it worth this process? Is it worth investigations? Is it worth $250,000 or $300,000 or whatever the number is to set in train the possibility of a different governance framework that will oversee a population of about 60,000 people over the next 3 decades? My suggestion to this community today and this council is yes, it should. It has that responsibility and it should take it now.
Thanks, Henry. All right. Oh, Nick, you've got a last question. Hang on, microphone's coming.
You said that you feel that you're the best person in a position to handle all this, but as that other lady mentioned, you're very frequently in the public for the wrong reasons, and you're spending huge amounts of money on legal fees and such. You don't really have my confidence that that will be the case. And also, could I ask, will there be an opportunity to have a vote on this from the areas affected?
So I'll take the first part as a comment. Alex, a vote, I don't think that's part of the process.
It's not a formal part of the process. The Commission has an obligation to engage. It also has, under its own guidelines, when it was considering how it would do this, it decided that it wouldn't set rules for itself at the outset, but would, if it gets a general proposal for investigation, will put out an engagement plan on how they choose to do that. So it's possible that they may choose to hold a vote. I would suggest, though, that it's unlikely, that they're probably more likely to choose other methods of finding out what people's views are. But I can assure you that you would have ample opportunity to put that view forward, and it will be held heard clearly from the Commission is the main thing.
Thanks, Alex. All right, if there are no last questions, I might move on to next steps and how to engage further. Is there any other question? All right, so obviously we've had tonight's session, which hopefully you've been able to clarify some of those questions, receive some information. We've got another meeting like this next Monday night, same deal, 7 o'clock start, same panellists, presentations, opportunity for question and answer to be able to download some information onto the walls. The consultation process itself in this very first stage, which will enable the council to make a decision whether they want to proceed into the next phase that Alex has described, that closes on the 7th of October. And then flowing from that, consultation process, council makes a decision based on the feedback from the consultation. There's a summary report for consideration that goes to council and a decision on the 3rd of November. If the decision is made at that time by council to proceed, then as Alex has described, process kicks in again around what that looks like in terms of moving on through to the Commission. In terms of how to engage further, please, before you leave tonight, feel free to download any comments, like feedback about what you'd like or what you don't like about the proposal. Use the sticky notes provided. If you need more, Kirsty will give you more. She's at the door, but please feel free to stick them up on the posters before you go. There's also a survey available online. So if you go to the Gawler Council website and the Your Voice part of it, you'll see that online link. but it's quite a comprehensive survey. It speaks to communities of interest and where people identify with and talk about that cultural and social connection amongst other things. But please go and complete that survey. You can also provide a written submission, again, either via online or over the counter at various council facilities, including this one, the Gawler Administrative Centre, etc. You can post it. I'm sure you know the postal address there, or you can email it direct to council as well. All of this information is available on the Town of Gawler website around this issue. Now, also on the 3rd of November, you can make a verbal representation to council, to that council meeting. There's a special council meeting to be held, so if you feel that you would like to go and speak direct to the elected members at that council meeting, you can do that as well. So that brings us to the end of tonight's proceedings, folks. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you for letting me boss you around a little bit. I have a very light touch for me tonight. Some meetings, you never know. I know some in the room have been in ones where I've been at and I've had to be a lot more bossy, but I'd like to say a special thank you. I'd like to thank Alex Hart, because I think she has done a wonderful job tonight in conveying independence, but also information. Thank you, Alex. I felt like you're in the hot seat and you really got drilled on that, but you can see there's a lot to it, and I think it was really useful to have you here tonight. So thank you, Alex. I also thank Mayor Redman, obviously, for your input and clarity tonight, as well as Henry. Thanks very much, Henry, for your input too. I'd also like to thank all the staff that are in the room that have helped us run this. Another reminder, we have videotaped this, so it will be on the council website within a few days' time if you want to relive this experience. And again, if you want to join us next Monday night, same place, we'll be here too. So thanks everyone for your time tonight. Good night.